Good morning. Welcome to the premium public video forecast discussion for Wednesday, July 3rd, 2014, ahead of our 4th of July weekend. Again, if you didn't see, I also issued a schedule for updates through the weekend. And of course, from July 4th through Sunday, we're just going to have normal weekend updates. And so today's the last full update. And of course, tonight at 8 p.m., we have our live chat. Now, everyone is focused on one thing, and that's Hurricane Beryl that is approaching Jamaica. Now, here's the good news. Our hurricane is weakened. It's still a category 4, though. Okay, so this does not mean that, hey, Jamaica dodged a bullet. No, they're very much going to get slammed with this storm. Currently, as of 8 a.m., we have sustained winds of 145 miles per hour. At its peak, the winds were at 160 miles per hour. Now, when this storm was at its peak, all the conditions were nearly perfect. Or, well, basically, they were perfect. You had very warm waters. You had no vertical wind shear. You had no dry air. But warm core lows are very fickle creatures. And so when you start to increase some of the shear, when you start to introduce a little bit of dry air, that's when you start to get a little bit of weakening. But at the same time, because of the strength of this storm, not only at the surface where we're measuring the winds and the mid levels, but the upper levels. You see, when you have a powerful hurricane like this, it influences the nature of the upper level environment. So it enhances the anticyclone circulation aloft, and as a result, it slows down the influence of, let's say, vertical wind shear, for example, via a weak trough. Now, those southerly winds, they are starting to have an impact, and the impact that they have is that they start to alter the outflow of the storm and the development of substance at the center of the storm. But it does it at a much slower rate than what the model guys was suggesting. And that's what I've been saying for the past couple of days. And so what we have here is not a rapidly weakening storm, as some of the model guys have suggested, but instead a gradual weakness. So instead of 160 miles per hour, we're talking about 145 miles per hour. Any way you slice it, that's still catastrophic damage and a very significant storm surge heading right into the southern portions of Jamaica. So unfortunately, this is not good, especially this start of the season. I mean, this storm alone is already going to push your ACE score for the season to the above normal levels, and we're only at B, and it's only early July. So the good news, and we'll talk about this more tonight, is that we are going to be moving into a more quiet regime after this storm. So that's certainly some good news, and we'll cover exactly why that is the case. But this morning, we're just going to focus on the fact that this storm means business for Jamaica. Now, after it leaves, you can see the NHC track here takes the storm towards the Yucatan Peninsula. You're going to have increasingly unfavorable conditions, and there's also another factor as well. The sea surface temperatures out here have been cooled a bit because of the recent tropical activity. Nothing strong, but enough to create a little bit of cooling, a little bit of upwelling. So we're not seeing the same heat content here around the Western Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico like what we've seen out here, where we just have incredibly well above normal temperatures. Now, with that being the case, it's still plenty warm enough here in the Gulf of Mexico to support an intensification of a tropical system. So, again, the idea is that Beryl tracks across the Yucatan Peninsula. This will create significant disruption of the low-level circulation. You get more dry air. Again, anytime you have interaction with land, which is why we see our hurricane weaken as it's moving past Jamaica and then heading towards the Yucatan Peninsula, you have a disruption of the low-level circulation. You have a little bit more dry air being pulled in, and you have vertical wind shear. So you have a weakening hurricane heading towards the Yucatan Peninsula, but still, I would not let your guard down if you're out here. And then it's going to be tracking into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, in the Gulf of Mexico, it's going to be around the Western Atlantic Ridge, which is going to be out here. And so you can see the spread here. Why do we have this spread here? Well, the track of this storm is going to be dependent on the exact position of the Western Atlantic Ridge and the upper level circulation. So if you want this to stay out of Texas, and of course, we'd rather just not exist at all, but we'll deal with what we have to deal with. If you're in Texas and you're saying, I really don't want to deal with this storm or the rainfall with it, what you want is a lot of hot and humid conditions. Why? You want a strong high pressure system here at the surface and at the upper levels of the atmosphere. In other words, a strong ridge, because that would drive this storm right into the central Mexican coast. But it looks like the Western Atlantic Ridge is going to be more dominant here, with a little bit more weakness out here towards portions of the western Gulf of Mexico. And so that could allow for a slight turn to the north. It's going to be tricky. But either way, as the storm moves through, it's not going to be anywhere near as strong as what we're seeing now, but still plenty of rainfall, still a hurricane. At this point, it would be a category 1 or 2 hurricane moving into the Mexican coast. And then by the time we get to Sunday night into Monday morning, it'll be making landfall somewhere around there. So we have some time to watch this, obviously, as it evolves. But again, the reason why we won't see this becoming a major hurricane again is because it's going to be moving through land, the Yucatan Peninsula, which is going to severely disrupt the storm. And then you're going to have more of a southerly or southerly wind pattern, either from the southwest or from the due south. And that's also going to increase shear. And so that's also a factor out here. So several factors to consider as this storm is evolving. But you can see where we're heading out here. All you need is a little bit of shear, and you can disrupt these warm core lows, which is why when you're forecasting for these storms, you want to compartmentalize this in terms of strength and intensity into a 3-day period in terms of trusting model intensity, and then look at the overall regime that the storm is moving in. All right, and understand, okay, what can impact the storm? What are reasonable guard lines here, and then you go from there. So when you see individuals trying to use 10-day models, or if they start to produce insane results of storms either going into the Gulf of Mexico or up the East Coast, they don't have an understanding of what is involved in the 500 millibar pattern. And so they create these, let's say, screenshots for YouTube and whatnot to scare you, to make you click on the video, right? But it's not based on science and it's not based on reality. So we're going to stick to that. Meanwhile, closer to home, let's jump here. High pressure is in control. Excellent weather conditions are in place. I hope you enjoyed the past couple of days because it's coming to an end. High pressure is shifting off the coast. Winds are coming in from the south. We've seen a slight, ever so slight increase in the humidity. Temperatures ranging from the upper 60s to mid 70s throughout the region. You can see the slight increase here. This is from the spc.gov here. And again, past couple of days, we've had a lot of dew points in the lower 50s. Now we're pushing into the 60s. The low temperatures really aren't all that far off from what we've been dealing with, but the increase in humidity is definitely noted with more of a southerly wind. On the radar and surface map from WeatherTap, you can see high pressure shifting off the coast. Notice you get these little isolated showers here. A lot of this is not reaching the ground, but notice the increase here. Okay, so what's happening? Well, the high pressure shifting off the coast and moisture is increasing in the atmosphere. A more tropical air mass is starting to invade. See that it's starting to show up in the visible satellite picture with some low clouds and fog earlier this morning starting to give way. On the infrared satellite picture, let's zoom in a little bit. This is from our WeatherTap feed. You can see the shift starting to happen. You got a trough here. Remember this trough earlier on in the week that was exiting? It's out here in the Atlantic. And you have this ridge building over our region. And you have this cold front passage, right? But not really. When you take a look at the water vapor satellite picture, notice your strongest lifting couplet, right? So you have your sinking air and your rising air here. It's all lifting up towards the St. Lawrence River Valley. You're starting to see a fundamental change in a pattern where the Western Atlantic Ridge overall begins to dominate. So in the summer, you don't always have uniform setup in terms of your upper level troughs and ridges and whatnot. Sometimes you get these little troughs undercut over the larger ridge at, let's say, 250 millibars, but the overall theme remains the same. The Western Atlantic Ridge is taking control, and these troughs are going to be digging over the Great Lakes, but not making much headway. That means we're kind of in between. And that is what we're seeing here in the 500 millibar pattern here, where there's our trough that we're talking about. Over the next 48 hours, that trough begins to basically separate, becomes this wandering upper level low. And the overall theme in the polar jet stream is this broad ridge, right? And when we go to 850 millibars, you start to see a shift here. And that shift continues to grow. Where notice these troughs here, they're not digging further south. They're getting focused up towards the St. Lawrence River Valley. And we see that going forward. And as that's evolving, the Western Atlantic Ridge is growing at all levels of the atmosphere. Sure, you have this little upper level feature hanging around off the East Coast here. And that's something that, over the next 10 days, we're really going to watch to see maybe it develops some sort of subtropical characteristics. But the overall theme is the Western Atlantic Ridge grows in strength. And our trough here doesn't make much headway to the east. And we're stuck in between. And so what that means is that you start getting this tropical air mass constantly setting up over the region with our 850 millibar temperatures between anywhere from 17 degrees Celsius to 20 degrees Celsius. So if you bring that down moist adiabatically and adiabatically overall, it sets up a theme, where you get temperatures ranging from the mid 80s to mid 90s in general. You really don't want to go above the mid 90s unless you have perfect conditions, clear skies, and sinking air. So, considering the tropical nature of this pattern, you're going to have low clouds in the morning. And what about thunderstorms in the afternoon? Well, take a look at the precipitant water values. They're steadily increasing as well. And when you start seeing a lot of red constantly showing up in your forecast, this means you have very moisture loaded atmosphere. And this is from the surface up to 500 millibars. This is the amount of water in that column. Typically, we are in this level, even in the summer. In the winter, we're down here, right? Because colder temperatures, less moisture can be held, right? So you're typically down here, and no matter what, down here is very dry. So this is typically in the winter. This is typically us in the summer. This is abnormal. This is tropical. This is something that you would expect down here. And what we're seeing here is this constant transport of deep tropical moisture attempting to move into the region almost every day. And so the combination of these factors, well, what's driving that? We'll take a look. This is the integrated vapor transport. Okay. Think of it as like, where is the moisture coming from? And as we look at the next 10 days, and there is Beryl. There's our circulation. There's our Western Atlantic Ridge. This is where we are, by the way. And over the next 5-10 days, that transport is originating in the tropics, coming through the Caribbean into the Gulf of Mexico, and then rotating up the East Coast. So this whole feature here, you're basically getting your moisture transport coming in from the Bahamas, from the Caribbean, and running right up the coast. And then you get these little polar troughs trying to come through. The strongest lifting is up here. So what you end up with is these weak cold fronts and troughs. And so what this pattern will set up is low clouds in the morning, maybe some fog, some locally dense fog. And in the afternoon, the threat for those pesky, isolated to widely scattered showers and thunderstorms. And depending on the interaction of what we call mesoscale features each day, they're going to look a little different. And this is probably a bit overdone, maybe a little bit of convective feedback here for 4th of July. But you get the idea here, okay? Where you have these little weak boundaries, you have a lot of moisture, you have tropical conditions, you have temperatures between the mid 80s and mid 90s, and you get a spark off of a couple of thunderstorms. And when those thunderstorms develop, they create what we call outflow boundaries, which set up old mesoscale boundaries for the next day. And you have sea breeze fronts. So it's not as simple as cold front moves through line of thunderstorms. This is a situation where you have a tropical air mass in place, constantly remaining in place, especially after today, all the way through next week. And for each one of those days, you have these boundaries hanging around. And as these boundaries are hanging around and interacting with each other, and temperatures rise up into the 80s and 90s, and you destabilize the atmosphere, each day you're going to have a threat for a thunderstorm popping up over your neck of the woods. And with the winds coming from the southwest, generally light in the mid levels, they're not going to move very fast. So overall, these thunderstorms are going to remain below severe levels, but if they do touch off of severe levels, they won't be tornadic. They'll be based off of deep tropical moisture being lifted up in the mid levels of the atmosphere, reaching a colder parcel of air in the mid levels. As a result, they condense, that area cools, and then slams towards the ground, or as what we call downburst wind gusts, straight line wind gusts. And those could easily exceed over 55 miles per hour and thus designate a severe thunderstorm. So that is essentially what we're going to be dealing with. Now, for today, not bad. Slight increase in humidity, but overall temperatures aren't too bad, ranging from the upper 70s to lower 80s on Long Island, lower to mid 80s along the coast, mid 80s in the Delaware River Valley, and lower to mid 80s over the interior. Tomorrow, a few low clouds, some fog, low temperatures ranging from the mid to upper 60s. Moving forward for 4th of July tomorrow, if you have plans for barbecue, perhaps, maybe watching the fireworks, keep an eye to the sky for a threat of a thunderstorm or two. Temperatures will range from the upper 70s to lower 80s on Long Island, mid to upper 80s along the coast, upper 80s to lower 90s in the Delaware River Valley, and lower to mid 80s over the interior. For Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, you can go all the way to Wednesday. This is the overall theme of this forecast. Low clouds in the morning, followed by sky cloud cover by the afternoon. Each day, as weakening cold fronts and troughs linger around the region and interact with other mesoscale boundaries like sea breeze fronts and old outflow boundaries, there will be a threat for scattered showers and thunderstorms. Not a washout, but some of these thunderstorms with all this tropical moisture will be capable of some very heavy downpours. Low temperatures will range from the mid to upper 60s over the northern interior and lower to mid 70s along the coast, mid 70s generally in your urban areas. High temperatures will range from the lower to mid 80s over the northern interior, upper 70s to mid 80s on Long Island, mid to upper 80s along the rest of the coast, and lower to mid 90s in the Delaware River Valley. And that heat index each day, especially in your urban areas and I-95 corridor just away from the coast, will range from the mid to upper 90s in the afternoon. Unless you get hit with one of those thunderstorms, in which, in that case, you have periods of rain and a very slow moving thunderstorm complex with plenty of vivid lightning as well. That is generally the forecast that we are looking at for 4th of July weekend and on through next week as we enter our summer weather pattern. We'll talk about this more tonight at 8 p.m. with our live chat, and we'll also have the latest on Hurricane Beryl as it's moving through and heading towards the Yucatan Peninsula. That is your forecast for today. Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful weekend. And as always, stay safe out there.